Hi everyone and welcome back to Power Motoryacht. I'm your host, Editor-in-Chief Dan Harding. Like many of you, I suspect, I've watched more videos from Haulover Inlet than I certainly want my boss to know about. Videos of stuffed bows, near disasters, and in general just bad boating. It can be strangely addicting, especially if you get sucked into the comment section. I've long kind of wondered, are these social media accounts that promise inexperienced boaters the 5 seconds of fame, are they to blame for such bad behavior, or are these channels simply shining a light on bad boating that's been going on for a long time? I spent a day recently observing the relatively mundane comings and goings at the infamous Inlet. I also had the chance to interview U.S. Coast Guard Recreational Boating and Safety Specialist Scott Zapaniak to gain a professional's perspective on what we're all seeing on social media. I really appreciated Scott's ability to break down the mistakes he's seeing boaters make, not just on social media, but in inlets everywhere. I hope you enjoy our conversation and that you'll keep a lookout for my full feature in an upcoming issue of Power Motoryacht. All right, without further ado, welcome to the conversation.
Scott, Nick, thank you guys so much for joining me today to talk about Haulover Inlet and some of the coverage the area is receiving, and then also some of the. I just really would like to talk about safe boating, especially as it regards to Haulover Inlet and inlets in general. One of the first things I wanted to ask you guys about is one of the most popular types of coverage in or around Haulover seems to include videos of boats stuffing their bows, waves, and giant walls of water filling their boats. How should boaters avoid such situations, and why?
Well, boy, that's a multi-layered question there.
It is. I'm hitting you right out of the gate, just like one of those waves.
Yeah, first of all, if you spend some time in South Florida, it's sunny. There's lots of bathing suits and bikinis out, and people are going to Miami and Miami Beach to have a good time. And perhaps personal safety and boating safety is not top of mind, but having a good time is top of mind. So the couple different things related to that inlet. It's most challenging when there's a falling tide and an east wind, or a wind and swell with an east component. Mm-hmm. And so the tidal currents going against the waves, forcing the waves to be steep and more dangerous. They're closer together. And so one of the first ways to do it is to avoid those kind of waves is wait until slack tide or wait until an incoming flood tide, and then the conditions go away. I've been at that inlet, and it's flat as a pancake, and then the tide starts running out, and just like that, the seas start building up. So in other parts of the world with greater tidal flow, they say when in doubt, wait it out. That certainly applies there. The another layer of that question is your boat seaworthy? And a lot of the boats that I see on wavy boats and Qualified Captain and the Water Sports Foundation and all the different channels that film down there are bow riders. And in my 40 years of experience, a bow rider is a Great Lake boat. It's not a sea boat. It's not an ocean boat. And certainly on a calm day, the ocean is a big lake. But at that inlet, again, with the tidal considerations, it's a challenging body of water. I've seen some of the big fire boats that are designed for heavy water. Some of the Coast Guard boats really plow through there, and that's advanced boat handling. So if your boat's not capable and you're not trained to work in that kind of environment, that's a good way to avoid it. These are things that are on the more extreme days. Yeah. On the less extreme days, if you're in a seaworthy boat and know what you're doing, you're going to take some time and study the wave pattern and see that there's an area of bigger, larger, taller waves and an area of smaller waves. And so you'll aim, ideally the outgoing traffic's keeping to the right, the incoming traffic's keeping to the right. Boats are passing port to port. But again, looking for the area of the water without the larger waves is a simple, good strategy. I drive down the road, I see a big pothole. If it's safe to do so, I go steer around it, change lanes and steer around it. I don't go right through it. So I don't know why people would choose to go right through the center. Just a couple of different ideas, and we can go more deeper into that if you like.
Yeah, I want to play dumb for just a second and go back to the bowrider question, because it really it's so prevalent, right? It's almost a stereotype that's the kind of boat that's going to have the biggest problems. But why do you feel that the bowriders, specifically, are being so challenged and are so dangerous in these types of conditions?
And so, just so we're talking on the same terms, when I talk about a bowrider, it's a smaller recreational boat with a seat on the seats on the front in the boat, and they become a big water scoop when you hit a wave like this. And you've obviously seen the videos of the boats that take on water like that. They scoop up a wave or two. They become inherently less stable, more tippy, and at that point, the operator panics and turns at the worst possible time, right in the thick of it. And now the wave energy is impacting the boat on its side and rolls it over in a capsize. That's called broaching. And so again, a great boat. We love to have people get outside and enjoy our natural environment. And a bowrider like that is not designed for ocean waves.
The water scoop was exactly what I was hoping you would touch on, Scott. So no, thank you for pointing that out, and it really is a great segue to my next question. Is the most dangerous thing that happens is that panic? You realize, way too late. I loved your line, "If in doubt, wait it out." But normally, what happens is the panic sets in, and you're in the middle of the inlet. The waves are kind of at their peak and at the most stacked, and that's when we're seeing people execute some questionable turnarounds. Can you touch on that maybe a little bit more, and why that's the human instinct to want to turn around and run home, but why that is so dangerous and why you should probably try to push on?
Well, the human instinct is to go explore it, and we often don't know what we don't know, and recreational boaters not transiting in the inlet like that don't know what they don't know, but they learn pretty quickly when they're in the thick of it. But they still don't know that panic turn is a challenging thing to do. But we really, I don't want to advise anybody what to do in the middle of that panic turn. I want to encourage everyone not get themselves into that situation. If I'm using the highway analogy again,
yeah.
If I see flashing lights up ahead, if I see a fog bank up ahead, if I see a rain squall up ahead driving down the highway, I start to slow around and become really tuned in to my situation and be aware, situationally aware of what's going on around me. And then, we have a human nature, if we're going from point A to B, to go from point A to B. And even if there's danger, we hadn't thought about that. So my advice to anyone would be educate themselves. The Coast Guard provides some outreach and education funding to America's Boating Channel. America's Boating Channel on YouTube has a very specific clip, I think it's about 6 minutes long, about the challenges of Haulover Inlet. And so I've been running boats for 40 plus years in all kinds of challenging environments. If I go somewhere new, I'm studying the chart the night before. I'm looking at the Coast Pilot. I'm doing some internet research. So I'm aware of what to expect. And again, I don't think that there's any reputable source that says a small boat with an inexperienced boater, Haulover Inlet, or any of the inlets on the East Coast is a good mix. So again, being educated with a class, being educated with a specific area for some local knowledge beforehand, and that way you don't get into that trouble. Again, those boats shouldn't have been poking their noses. Some of those small boats had no business poking their noses out there in the first place. And so I really can't advise them how to best carry on after they scoop up a third or a half of the boatload of water. That's an emergency situation at that point.
That's a great point. Really well said, and we'll have to link to that video. That sounds like a great resource.
And if I may jump in here, Mr. Harding, that is also a phenomenal resource with the Coast Guard Auxiliary. The Coast Guard Auxiliary has a huge presence here in Florida, and a core component of what they do is boating safety. So ensuring you have the right safety equipment, and in terms of boating safety lessons, they can administer boating safety courses to ensure everything is good to go regarding just recreational boating. But in terms of the Haulover Inlet, I'm not sure if those kind of instructions can really carry over to the more intense wake you would experience over there. But it's certainly a good base for the general public to have if you haven't already done such a course.
I think it's an excellent point. Thank you, Nick. The next situation I wanted to talk about, the next situation that is probably among the most viral because it gets such a visceral reaction among boaters, is seeing guests, and especially young people, children, sitting on the bow when a boat is going through the inlet. There's no secret where I stand on it. I have 2 young kids now, and it makes me feel just something in the pit of my stomach. But maybe that's a frequent misconception. Is that something you talk about, Scott?
Sure, and not to confuse terms, but we often call that bow riding as well.
Yeah.
Whatever kind of boat you're sitting with your hands on the railing, and your legs are dangling over the bow. Not only is that's illegal, that's negligent operation from the federal perspective, from the Coast Guard perspective. So Coast Guard boarding officer would see that, and at the very least issue a warning, and do a little education, or write a ticket. The fine for negligent operations up to $5,000. But whether it's legal or illegal, I think is what less important, that it's just downright dumb. And again, we all know cars, and imagine taking your 2 little kids to the supermarket. You've installed a grab rail on the front of the hood of your little pickup truck or your car, and they're sitting with their legs dangling down over the front of it. It's just downright dumb. In the boat, you hit that wave a little too hard. The kid or the adult slips, and down they go, and now they're struck by the boat, and perhaps run over by the propeller. Those propeller injuries falling off the boat are often fatal. And a terrible incident in Georgia not too long ago, where a young child, they hit a sandbar, he went flying, and then the boat bounced off the sandbar and killed a 6-year-old child. And so again, the consequences of that are incredibly extreme, and often fatal. And so we just want to encourage anybody not to do it. It's fun. We want to play Titanic. We want to have the fresh air in our faces, but it's just downright dumb.
No, I couldn't agree more, and I appreciate the professional's perspective on it. It's the risk versus reward just seems crazy to me, but it's it does happens far too often. I guess one of the other similar topic, but it just general falls on board is probably the next level of viral coverage we see from Haulover. Maybe it's not from the bow per se, but it's it's similar to the stuffing the bow or landing really hard. You see people tend to be bodies flying everywhere, and oftentimes it seems like in these videos people aren't seriously hurt, but they certainly could be. I have to think this would be especially concerning if you have guests on board that are not lifelong boaters. I mean, I typically find that that's a real mix for very serious injury. But do you mind touching on that real quick?
Not at all. And when you talk about guests falling, the first thing that comes to mind is let's have a beer or two or six, or hard liquor or other substances that impact our balance.
Right.
We generally think that one beer in the maritime environment with some dehydration, with the vibrations of the boat, with the sun, equals about 3 beers sitting in your living room. We used to talk about designating a sober skipper, and we've kind of changed that message because a drunk passenger is more likely to fall overboard, more likely to fall down and get hurt. And again, whether you're operating the boat or you're a passenger on the boat, that one beer becomes 3 beers and the 2 beers become 6 beers. So we'd encourage everyone to save their drinking until they get back to the shore and they have a safe Uber or a designated driver to take them home, because you generally don't fall out of a taxi cab if you have had a couple too many beers, but
Sure.
you very well might fall off the boat as a passenger with a couple too many beers is one thing. The other thing is that crossing an inlet, it's an area where enhanced seamanship comes in, enhance awareness, enhance caution. And if I was running a boat through an inlet like that, and the times I have, okay, guys, you're sitting up on the bow, you're safe, don't have your legs hanging off, but we're getting ready to go through an inlet. Yeah. It's time to come off the bow. Right. One hand for you and one hand for the boat at all times. Coming off the bow back, sitting down in a seat, and not flopping around like a flounder up on the bow of the boat as it's slamming through the inlet. So again, just some basic seamanship, some caution, some respect for the marine environment, some respect for the ocean.
That's a great. This is all, really great reminders. I especially like the point you made. I hadn't heard that expression about, one drink turning into 3, but it really does make so much sense when you're talking about, the motion of the boat, and especially people that are not, used to the subtle movements of a boat underway. So I think that's a really great rule of thumb.
Yeah, and Dan, if I may,
Please.
I'm don't want to sound doom and gloom. I've been introducing people to the maritime environment since the early 1980s as a scuba instructor and a tour boat captain and a sea kayak instructor and guide. And boy, there's nothing I like more than seeing people out in the environment, out in the marine environment, enjoying it. Nothing I love more than that. And it's certainly healthier, I think, than sitting on the couch and scrolling social media all day or watching television. I'd like to see everybody get out and enjoy our maritime environment, our coastal environment. But again, we need to know that it's a different environment than walking around the block or driving to the supermarket. We need to learn about it, and certainly we need to respect the power of nature.
We talked about, and I'm not sure if you could talk about this or not, but I'm going to ask anyway, because it just seems like in my mind, if I have guests out for the day, especially non-boating guests, and I'm trying to show them a good time, why am I in an inlet? I mean, why? I mean, especially, I'm thinking I'm from up north. You're not going to the Bahamas, right? So why are these people finding themselves in these situations, do you think? Because my thought and feeling is, are you trying to be Instagram famous? Are you trying to, show your friends, hey, look, we're on Instagram? I mean, what is causing this?
Well, I think that the longboard surfing community got it right 50 or 60 years ago when they talked about the term Kodak courage. And, when the surfers were out in Hawaii and there was a big set, they were being cautious and using their heads. But when the Surf Magazine team showed up with the telephoto lenses and the video cameras. Boy, I'm going to be on the cover of that surf magazine. I'm going to be famous. And they started using less common sense and started getting hurt. I think it's just human nature. My guest would say, "Hey, I've heard about Haulover, and let's poke our noses out there." And if it was the right day and I had the right boat, I checked the weather and I wasn't expecting an afternoon thunderstorm, and everything lined up, no reason not to slide out there. But if it's heavy traffic, it's the thunderstorms coming in, and it's the tides falling, and there's an eastern component to the wind and the waves. Sorry, gang. It looks fun on Instagram, but everything we see on social media isn't really as it seems. That's a hazardous situation, and so we're not going to stick our noses in the inlet today. Again, Dan, the big takeaway is recreational boaters often don't know what they don't know, that they don't know, and education is key. As Nick indicated, the Coast Guard Auxiliary or any other number of classes, I think any instructor in the world would ask the question, "Hey, should I take a small boat through an inlet with a falling tide and opposing wind and waves?" The answer would be no. That's a dangerous environment. You just need to stay out of an environment like that.
It's such a good point, and it's almost, how do we get the question in front of these boaters before they get to the inlet where it says, "Hey, do you know what's the tide and wind doing?" Because I guarantee the vast majority of people that are finding themselves in trouble, they have no idea when slack tide is. They might know slack. They might look at you crazy if you ask when slack tide. But it's like if you don't know what the conditions are, what the wind is doing compared to the tide, you should not be there. I mean, plain and simple, right?
Nationally, in the Southeast United States and in Florida, we see that the fatal boating accidents, the serious boating accidents, more often than not, the operator hasn't had any education about operating in a marine environment. It still boggles our imagination that if you want to drive a car on a street or a highway, you have to take a class and you have to take a practical exam. The fact of the matter is that there's no state in the country that requires a practical exam. Many states require education. Many states are catching up. That young people require education, but a lot of the population's already grandfathered in. Right. And you can buy that boat and operate it without any class. And I think we all need to be keep our ego in check and know that if we're doing something new, we can read about it, we can take a class about it, we can learn from skilled, experienced people who are doing that thing, whether it's mountain climbing or boating, and get educated instead of rushing into it headlong. And again, people who are taking classes are far less likely to get jammed up, to get hurt, or to get themselves or their passengers killed. And that should be motivation right there.
That speaks to a couple of things. One, we were just talking about this with my team this morning. There's a headline I have that I haven't gotten to use yet, but it's $1 million boats and $1,000 brains. I mean, it really is unbelievable when you have first-time boaters getting into the size that they can. And I think there's so many technological evolutions that are helping that. You do have joystick technology now and easier maneuverability. I think that's putting people in boats that they never would have dreamed of getting into, even 10 years ago. That's not so much of a question. That's just kind of an observation. But I really couldn't agree more. Let me ask you this, Scott. So, the Power Motoryacht audience, specifically, usually comprises a lot of lifelong boaters. Is really not smaller bowrider people that we're watching on Instagram, but maybe advice to a seasoned boater that is going through a hotspot like Haulover, where you are sharing a tight body of water with people of all experience levels. It can be very crowded, very congested on certain weekends. Any advice for, again, a competent skipper that is finding themselves in kind of a mishmash kind of situation?
Well, Dan, I've got two things to share about that. One is that I spent 7 days a week for a year as the safety boat captain on the Golden Ray shipwreck recovery project.
Wow.
In St. Simon Sound. And
amazing.
It's in the spring and the fall. Obviously, it's a part of the snowbird route with the larger yachts going north in the springtime and heading south to warmer waters in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing the number of 50, 60, 80-foot yachts transiting through the Sound, not knowing that the shipwreck had been there for 6 months, and not knowing where the channel was supposed to be, and you seeing that big open expanse of water and going on the south side over the sandbars. And so luckily we had a 24-hour presence out there, and we said, man, you are standing into danger there. You want to come along the channel side, along the pier. But again, the size of the vessel doesn't, and cost of the vessel doesn't always matter. If I'm doing a transit in an unfamiliar area, I'm doing a little research ahead of time, and a little research would have indicated that shipwreck and that construction project had been there for a year already and was marked on updated charts. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and I think the most important thing, is in Florida, we have about 60 fatal recreational boating incidents each year. And I don't know if a third or a half or more of those would have been avoided without a fatal outcome if the operator had just slowed down. The nautical rules of the road requires anyone operating a vessel maintain a safe speed. And how we start to decide what a safe speed is has things to do with proximity of other vessels. And what that means is that's congested going through the inlet, because it's a big ocean out there and a big intracoastal waterway behind it, but it's a very narrow inlet. So the concentration of vessels is great. The sea state is another thing that's required, and the proximity of the shoreline. So all of those things would tell a prudent mariner, a prudent boater, to slow down. And it kills me to see these boats going through there at 30 knots or faster. The bridge at Bow Harbor, the state of Florida has a slow speed, no wake, and that's defined as fully off plane, fully settled in the water, transiting that bridge. But I've seen boats myself go through there at 50 miles an hour, and it's a blind turn, and it's very, very crowded. We just had another fatal incident in Card Sound, a little south of Florida. Hit the bridge at high speed, person was killed. So again, slow down, maintain a safe speed, and everything at Haulover Inlet in particular lends itself to extra caution and slow speeds.
Man, there's some really great points. I especially love your first point of, not assuming that a large, expensive yacht sees you, that they know what they're doing and that they're trained. It used to more, I personally feel like, maybe 20 years ago, that was more the case. Entry-level boaters weren't getting into boats necessarily that large. But again, I think some of the advances in propulsion and technology are, which are great for the sport, don't get me wrong, are putting large, expensive boats in dangerous situations. So really, that's a really great point, especially for our audience. The only other thing, now like almost trying to do your job, but is it, if I'm a boat, especially if I'm trying to come from offshore, I'm trying to come in through Haulover, and I just see that it's a mess, right? Almost like one of these social media days where there's, kids and small boats blasting around and there's jet skis and things like that. I got to think maybe a good set of binoculars to try to like your first point was to try to wait it out, try to wait for some of the congestion to ease. I mean, that would seem like common sense to me. No.
Well, again, if we've got the luxury of boating during the week, it's a lot less crazy than boating on the weekends and the holidays. Having an understanding of the tidal currents and when slack tide will be coming up, because it can be all the difference in the world in an hour or two between short seas that are close together and steep and tall versus almost non-existent. And again, that's the force of the tidal current squeezing through the inlet there, meeting the energy of the incoming waves. So again, that when in doubt, wait it out mentality, scoping the area with binoculars, checking your tide and current charts, and then when you're going through an inlet, presumably with following seas as we're discussing, coming back from sea into the shore, into the protected waters, the strategy, the boat handling strategy, is to get on the back of a wave, keep speed with the wave on the back of the wave, not get in front of it, at which point it'll surf you down and potentially broach you or capsize you. And again, Coast Guard boat operators that do these in extreme situations in the Pacific Northwest and some areas of New England or not, they train for it. And it's the cream of the Coast Guard boat operators crop are highly trained to deal with these type inlet situations. Again, much more dramatic than perhaps Haulover, but the principles apply. And again, before you, a casual weekend boater that hasn't had a lot of boat handling classes, just avoid that area.
It's great. Another great point, Scott. Do you guys recommend practicing in because all the classes in the world are great, but in calmer conditions, getting yourself out there, not when it's 4 to 5s, but when you're in 1s and 2s, and just gaining that. How else do you gain that hands-on experience but practicing in more calm conditions? Is that something worth considering?
Well, when I started boating, it just became a clear passion. Back then in my early 20s, it was clear it was going to be a lifelong passion.
Yeah.
And I had great mentors and I had great training. Yeah. If you're going to be putting yourself in potentially compromising situations, you work up to that. So if you're going further offshore, you take a class about ditch kits and electronic position indicating radio beacons and personal locator beacons and repair kits, and you have a hands-on class about affecting emergency repairs. Certainly having wooden plugs tied to each through hole fitting is a good idea for any boat, but boy, it's a better idea if you're venturing 5, 10, 15, 20 miles offshore. So again, learning the Coast Guard Auxiliary, the U.S. Power Squadron, there's a number of outlets for classroom training, and that's a great first step. There's also a number of outlets for on-water training. The National Safe Boating Council certifies instructors for on-water classes. Some commercially available courses are available. And insurance companies are learning that if you're educated, that you're less likely to get into a jam. And so they're offering discounts for the larger boats, requiring some hands-on on-water training for the larger recreational boats.
I especially love the idea of getting hands-on training, especially because it's on your vessel. It could be you and a spouse to get that training with your boat. I think is so invaluable. So I love that you pointed out that resource.
And it's not that complicated. We watch the social media about the boats bumping around at the docks and crashing into each other at the docks and people getting hurt at the docks. And boy, it's as simple as turn the engine before you put it into gear. If you're in an outboard, and then click it into just clutch ahead and not use any throttle. It's really that easy. And it's most easily learned if you have a coach, if you have an on-water instructor showing you how to do it. But there's no magic to it. Again, it's just like learning to parallel park. I don't know if we do that anymore without pushing a button. It's just like, learning the basics in a car. You'll learn the basics of close quarters boat handling around docks and boat ramps and the like, and do it slow and you look like a pro. And if you do it fast, I don't know what you look like. You fill in that blank.
I like that. That's this is some really great kind of common sense advice, but I think a great reminder, especially, I know for us northern boaters, it's only January, but I know we're chomping at the bit to get the boats back in. So that really, is there anything else you wanted to add, especially how it pertains to Haulover? I might, maybe ask you to come back on the podcast at a later note, because this has just been some really great practical experience. I love your perspective.
Dan, first of all, anytime I can support your efforts, let me know. We'll get you my contact information.
Thank you.
And I was thinking about the boats in the boatyard, and we were taught as young Coast Guardsmen about painting a boat. Proper preparation prevents poor paint performance, and that means if you paint all over slime, the paint's not going to stick. You have to sand it down, and you have to put the primer down, and then put the top coat on it. Mm-hmm. Same thing. Proper preparation and planning prevents poor on the water performance, and that proper planning is education. It's doing a voyage plan. It's doing a little research before you go into an unfamiliar area. It's checking the weather before you come out. We've heard stories of the storm that comes out of nowhere, and when we look at the meteorological history, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was forecast the day before. And so just checking the weather the morning before you're venturing out and having a plan B, or having the maturity and the common sense to say, nope, today is not the right day for it. It's too windy. The waves are going to be too big. We've got a squall line expected to come through this afternoon. Right. Maybe that's the day to take a walk around the block, or God forbid, scroll social media.
It's funny, but it's such a great point. I feel like sometimes, when people are planning this big boat outing, they don't have a plan B. So it's like we have to, the weather's bad, but we have to go anyway. It's have a good plan B. That's a good day to have a barbecue at the dock or something. So, well, that's excellent, Scott, Nick. I really appreciate all your time today. You gave some great perspective, especially for this Haulover piece. That'll be an upcoming issue of Power Motoryacht, and I might bother you guys again with some follow-ups. And Scott, I would like to take you up on the offer to chat again at some point. Excellent.
It'd be my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much
for the introduction. Nice to meet you, Dan.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Nick, thanks so much. You've been really great in helping to get this set up. I hope we could team up again too. Maybe maybe if next time I'm down in Florida, I would love to maybe I could stop by. I'd love to meet you in person.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, getting that safety messaging out is really important for us, because like Mr. Scott was saying, just that prevention piece is really the biggest part of the pie, and things like the engine cutoff switch law that went into effect last year. The government is starting to get on that curve of prevention rather than response.
I love that. And we're just trying to approach seamanship in an interesting way, and especially Power Motoryacht, like I said, we have a lot of lifelong, really educated boaters that get the magazine. They're like super enthusiasts, right? If you're buying a magazine about boating, but we're trying to approach this in interesting ways, like this Haulover story. And so we're not wagging our finger at people, but I do want to get these important messages back out in front of people. So I'd love to work together again.
And I do have one parting shot. The most important parting shot is boy, the hardest part of the world to get people to wear their life jackets is in South Florida. Again, bathing suits and bikinis. And certainly if I'm transiting in Inlet, my passengers probably are all wearing inflatable life jackets, regardless if they're on the boat or in the boating environment, even on the dock. And inflatables are a great option in that the hot climates, you get to the point where you don't know you're wearing them. But if you're not being conscientious and having yourself and your passengers wear your life jackets at all times, boy, certainly transiting an inlet is the time where you'd have your passengers put their life jackets on. So again, looking into inflatables, especially in the hot climate, or any life jacket that you're wearing is better than one when you're not wearing. And a lot of cause of death is drowning. And if you're wearing a life jacket, you're far less likely to drown.
I think that's a great way to wrap things up and excuse me, a really great reminder. So I appreciate that. Excellent. Well, guys, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. I will look to bother you guys again real soon.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you again. Appreciate it, guys.
Of course.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Bye.
Bye-bye.